Hey there, Eager to Pleasers. Welcome back to another episode of the Eager to Please podcast. I am very excited to introduce today's special guest. Not only am I fortunate to call him a friend, but he's also a fellow songwriter whom I've admired since moving to Nashville. What's ironic is that I was a longtime fan of his before our circles connected. Through a mutual friend and mentor, Nancy Decken, and her Discover Sooner group, our paths began to cross more and more frequently. This witty, inspirational, and just an amazing human being I'm about to introduce has authored over 40 books, has had a very successful career as a licensed marriage and family therapist, has been a guest on The Oprah Show, showcasing his book, Do One Thing Different, and has more recently dove all in to a successful songwriting career with an impressive catalog of over 2,000 songs. It's worth mentioning, too, I might add, has had over 200 artist cuts and at least a dozen sync placements in film and TV. I am so excited to welcome my dear friend, Bill O'Hanlon.
Well, from the Oprah Show to Eager to Please podcast, I'm moving up in the world.
Well, I know you keep quite a full calendar these days, splitting your time between Nashville and New Mexico and island breezes. So I just want you to know how grateful I am for your time as we take a closer look at this topic that I think actually a lot of us struggle with, and that's being eager to please. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
What an impressive list of accomplishments you've had over your lifetime, and we haven't even covered all of them. Obviously, this has been a lifelong journey for you. So I'm curious, how did you know that you wanted to become a therapist?
When I was in high school, we had a career day and some guy came along and he was a psychologist. And I didn't actually want to be a psychologist, but I was interested in spiritual things and the paranormal when I was a teenager. And I wanted to be a parapsychologist, sort of Ghostbusters and investigating psychic phenomena scientifically. And so I thought, well, psychologist, that's the closest that I could come. So I decided when I went to undergraduate school that I would major in psychology, which I did. But while I was there, I grew up in this big family, 8 kids. And I was very shy. I was the shy one, kind of the mama's boy, kind of super sensitive in this tough Irish Catholic family. And I was lost when I went away to school. My family had this thing where they encourage you to go far away and really spread your wings and develop your independence. And I was the least prepared. I was just so shy and so introverted that it was hard for me to make friends. I was frightened in social situations. I had some social anxiety. And gradually I became more and more withdrawn. I made a couple of friends, but they were about as weird and isolated as I was. And I became more and more, I didn't even know what it was at the time, but depressed. And I won't go into the long story about it, but basically I almost killed myself and a friend talked me out of it. And I promised her I wouldn't hurt myself. And so I was sort of stuck. I was like, oh, gosh, I got to be here. I got to figure out a way to be less miserable. And all I wanted to do was write poetry and not be around people. I play guitar as well. And so I thought, well, while I'm here, I've got to figure out a way to get less miserable. And so here I am in psychology classes, and they're not really helping me. They're very academic and very much analyzing what's wrong with people rather than how to be less miserable. And when I had a work-study job. When I was in university, I worked at an art gallery, and I met, just by chance, a psychiatrist who was semi-famous when I was there. And there happened to be an article about him. His name was Milton Erickson. There happened to be an article about him in the Newsweek magazine that was in the art gallery that week. Mm-hmm. I read it and I was hooked. And I thought, this guy is doing what I want, which is he's helping people be less miserable, helping them change their lives. And all of a sudden I found a direction. I've had not psychology, but psychotherapy. Psychology is about analyzing what's wrong with people and doing scientific experiments and theories about human beings and psychology and mental health and emotional health and behavioral health. But psychotherapy is about the process of helping people change. And so I knew my direction. All of a sudden, I got a lot more motivated in university. I got a lot more healthy. And I'd found my direction and I had a purpose to get up out of bed every day and got less depressed, finished my undergraduate degree, went on to graduate school, became a psychotherapist, specialized in marriage and family therapy, which that psychiatrist had a big influence on because he was one of the first psychiatrists who saw more than one person in his office in the late 40s. He started doing couples and family therapy, which was pretty unusual in those days. It was usually one person doing psychoanalysis, and he wasn't a psychoanalyst. He was much more practical than that, very Midwest kind of guy. And so I became a marriage and family therapist, and also under his influence, I did hypnotherapy and individual therapy. So I did that, but I started, as shy as I was, I started to argue with my graduate school professors because they were so focused on what was wrong with people. And my teacher, Milton Erickson, was focused on what was right with people, their resources, their strengths, their abilities, in addition to how they were messed up. And so I became a fierce advocate for recognizing both sides of people, kind of the messed up sides of people and the strengths and the resilience of people. Nowadays, that's not such a radical thing. There's positive psychology in the psychology field. There's solution-oriented, solution-focused therapy and sort of positive approaches to psychotherapy. But in those days, it was kind of radical. And shy as I was, I became so passionate about it. I started going out and teaching workshops and giving lectures on this, which was totally out of character for me. Again, I didn't talk in classes in undergraduate, a little in graduate school, but I became, after facing my terrors as a public speaker at first, I became a passionate and pretty skilled public speaker. I've done 3,800 talks and workshops all around the world. And that's what I did for a major part of my living. I did clinical work. Obviously, I did therapy, but I also spoke. And then after about 8 years of speaking, people said, "Where's your book?" And I go, "Oh, I don't know how to write a book. I have no clue how to write a book." So people just kept coming up, and finally I thought, okay, I got to write a book. So I started writing books, and it's 42 now, and stopped me before I write again because I had a lot to say. Clearly, I'd stored up a lot of words when all those years I was shy. But that's my journey to becoming a healer. And then one to influence other healers so they would take a more effective and, I think, more respectful approach to people and include both sides of people, the kind of messed up sides and the resilient sides of people.
Yeah, I love that. You touched on something I feel like is maybe like strikes a nerve with me and maybe a lot of other listeners to the podcast about like trying to find your happy. And one of the things I feel like I admire about you, Bill, is your willingness to share all of these little nuggets that you've learned throughout your career, whether it's through writing books and sharing them that way, or in your songs, or coming on podcasts like this one, or hosting your own webinars. And one of the books that I came across when I was trying to do my research too for this episode was a book that you wrote called Do One Thing Different. And for me, from being in a place of unhappiness for years, trying to suppress it, thinking that I could just push through it, I'm wondering if maybe that was the reason why you wrote that book, is because maybe, that was your way of getting out of the unhappiness. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about why you wrote that book.
Well, I mean, as the name of this podcast was eager to please. And I was certainly a guy who was eager to please, always oriented towards making sure other people felt good and happy and they didn't get upset. And certainly it served me well in many situations, and it didn't serve me well in other ones. Like you, I'd get in situations in which I was just miserable and just, I felt like I was going to die if I stayed in those situations. But I stayed in there because I didn't want to upset the apple cart or get anybody upset with me or in life or whatever. I didn't want to hurt anybody. And, luckily I've changed that over the years. But being a therapist was really helpful to me because, so many people came in miserable and my job was to help them make changes. And what I noticed
Mhm.
was that it's really hard to make big changes. Like in your situation, what you had to face was a really big change. And that's scary stuff. And what I noticed was that a lot of people found it way easier to make small changes, and then those little changes would often lead to bigger changes. But it was way easier to make a little change. And I discovered, again, this is pretty personal, but when I was younger, I was sexually molested by a relative. And one of the strategies he used was to confuse me. He was just turned up the TV really loud and spoke in a really confusing way. And I was young and he was able to maneuver me and manipulate me. So I became kind of non-consciously compulsive about trying to understand things that were confusing. So I developed this ability, which is partly why I've written so many books, is I can take a lot of complex material and make it pretty understandable and pretty simple. So when it's time to write a book, usually the outline occurs to me first. It's just clear as a bell for me because it's a lot of information. It has to be organized in some way. And I've, having been a therapist and having sat with so many people who were stuck and also who had changed, I thought, okay, there's three major places where we can make changes. And it's easiest if we make small incremental changes in any of these three areas because they'll all affect the other areas. And the first one was change the doing. Change things change your actions and interactions. The usual ways that you do things. If you usually I had a friend who was not an early morning riser, she adopted two kids and all of a sudden they were up at like 6 a.m. and she was cranky. And one day her husband said to her, after she was cranky almost every morning, he said, "Did you get up on the wrong side of the bed?" And she knew my idea about changing one small thing. She said, "Maybe I did." So the next day she got out of his side of the bed and she just started laughing. It just changed her morning because it was just frivolous and kind of fun. And she was in a better mood that morning. And then that worked for about 6 months. And then she got cranky again and she decided to crawl off the front of the bed just as a fun experiment. So, getting out of the other side of the bed is an easy change. Changing your mood in the mornings, that's a hard change. That's a big change. Not being a morning person, that's a big change. So changing your actions, changing your interactions. That's the first one. So I call that change the doing. The second place is change the viewing. Change how you're seeing things. Change what you're focusing your attention on and how you're interpreting the situation. And obviously, when you made the changes that you made in your life, you probably changed the doing, changed the interaction, changed the action interaction. You changed your point of view and where you're focusing your attention. And then the third one is to change the context. Sometimes that means getting an ally. Sometimes that means moving to a different place, to a different city. Means, changing your environment, cleaning when I used to write books, I was procrastinating all the time and I would clean my whole office and then I could write a book. It was easier for some reason in a clean environment. I didn't change anything internally, but I felt a little different once I cleaned my environment. So small changes in one of those three areas, the doing, the viewing, and the context. So when I came up with those ideas, I thought, I want to write a book about that and just make it that simple and just do one thing different or do something different. Do one thing in a different way or do something different when you're stuck. You don't have to do it if you're not stuck. If things are going well, go for it. So I wrote this book, and my partner at the time knew I'm kind of a sparky guy. I've written all those songs, and I write quickly. Typically, when I write usually in an hour. If I can, I finish a song. I'm fast guy. I'm very sparky. And so I finished the book, and I showed it to her, and she read it. And she goes, "It's good, but it could be better." I'm like, so basically I rewrote the whole thing and I was bored out of my mind, but I went back and rewrote it. I gave it to her again and gave it to a couple of friends and they all said, "It's really, really good, but it could be better." And I rewrote it the third time. And when I did, I was like, wow, this is the best book I've written. So I had I had an agent, and the agent pitched us the book, and it got picked up by a big New York publisher, William Morrow, which was bought by HarperCollins before the book came out. And so I said, okay, I think this is the book that's going to get me on Oprah. And the publicist of the book company said, "Oh, Bill, everybody thinks the book's going to get on Oprah." And I said, "No, really, I think this is the one." And she said, "No." And she said, I said, "What can I do?" And she goes, "Don't do anything," because we had an author who was really gung ho like you, and she bugged the Oprah people so much they threatened they'd never have another one of our books on their show if we didn't call her off. So don't do anything. So what are you going to do? She said, "We're going to send him a book and a little one sheet, publicity."
Sure.
Packet about it. And I said, "That's it?" They probably get hundreds of those a day. And she said, "Yeah, they do." And I said, I just kept bugging her. And finally she said, "Okay, Bill, here's who you call to get on Oprah. Write this down right now. 1-800 prayer line." So, so I guess my prayers must have been heard, because a couple of months later she called me and said, "Oprah got the book and they want to have you on the show." And I was on the show, and the rest is history. So that book has sold the most of any of my books. It's sold thousands and thousands when out of the gate. And then it was shown as a rerun a few months later. It was in October. And then next March, they showed it as a rerun. It sold a bunch more books. And when it came out in paperback, it sold a bunch more. It's still in print. It's many, many years. It's 25 years since it's come out. And I still get checks every 6 months for it. So that's nice. And that book touched a lot of people. And one time I got an email that said it saved someone's life. So I thought, okay, that was worth rewriting 3 times.
Oh my gosh, for sure.
That was it.
For sure. Well, that's what I told you. I'm like, I wish I would have had that book 25 years ago, just because the title alone, I feel like it might be simplistic in and of itself, but I don't think people realize that it only takes like one small tweak in your day to like change your complete outlook. And for me, that's what I learned too, is just by starting with baby steps. It doesn't seem so insurmountable and overwhelming, and you're just like wanting to throw in the towel and not even try anything. So
it's funny you say that, because some people have come up to me and said, I didn't even read your book. I just saw it on the shelf. I saw the title and I changed something. And I was like, okay, good. I would have still liked to get a royalty, but okay, I'll take that. If it helps you, that's good. That's good.
That's right. Yeah. So it helps more people in just more than one way. So that's amazing. Interestingly, I had also listened to a podcast that you were doing with another psychologist, where he had actually made the connection between songwriting and having it be like a mode of therapy, which I have always said that that's kind of why I turned to songwriting to begin with, is that it was my outlet. It was my way of expressing my feelings without being judged. And if I wanted to keep them in my computer and not share them with anyone, that I could. But I feel I've reached a point now where I've come across so many people that have had similar feelings or experiences, and I'm now ready to, open up the lid and let some of those out. So what are your thoughts? I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on how those two have like an interconnected relationship, songwriting and therapy.
Well, yeah, I think songs are sort of freeze-dried emotions in 3.5 minutes. That is, they really, if they're good, we've all had those songs and it's like, oh, this is how I felt and I didn't have the words for it. Or, that song just moves me so much. The best songs, I think, encapsulate, like movie scenes. They encapsulate stories and emotions in a really short, condensed way. And that's a challenge, because, when I write a book, I have a couple 100 pages to explain myself and get the point across. When you do a song, you got 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, maybe at the most, depending on what genre you're writing in. And I think that's one element. The second one is, I think becoming a therapist was healing for me in a certain way, because I heard so many people's stories, and I realized, even at my weirdest moments, I'm in the normal range of human emotion and experience, like, oh yeah, Like when people would come in and they would tell me the most shameful thing, I would want to say, like, you too? Because we share so much in common as human beings. We all go through these, struggles and shame and pain and disappointment and love and longing and success and accomplishment. And it's just the stories of human beings are pretty much in this range. And you have to go pretty far out of it to be, really, really outside the realm of human experience. Obviously, people that kill people, the people that, believe that people can hear their thoughts and they're beaming stuff into them, that's pretty far outside of most normal ranges. And, those are challenging things. But I think it was healing for me just to hear everybody's story and go, yeah, me too. We've all got these struggles. We've all got these fears. We've all got these challenges. And I'm in the realm of normal experience and you're in the realm of normal experience. We all have challenges in relationships. It all starts hopeful and great. And then you get disappointed and you find the shadow sides of other people and yourself, you start to recognize those. And so because I was a therapist for 40 something years, when I go into a writing room, I usually co-write, as you do, I know. Sometimes I write on my own, but when I go into a writing room, I bring thousands of stories that obviously I don't tell the details to, but I can tell when a story rings true to human experience and when it captures that emotion, that freeze-dried emotion and story in a credible way and in a moving way. I think that's been really interesting to me to do. And, because again, I was kind of an introvert when I was younger. I read a lot. I still read a lot. That's my sort of escape inside. I love playing with words within music and having them fit the rhythms and trying to fit them into the musical notes and rhythms. That's so much fun for me. It's like a puzzle to do. And so I like that. And again, way, way shorter than writing a book. I don't know about it's easier than writing a book, but shorter than writing a book. And that fits my attention span, which is that of a gnat typically. So it's good.
Well, anyone in this day and age, I feel like you're in good company there. People want that short, concise Reader's Digest version. So
they do. They do.
You touched on this basic or common thread, I guess, that we as humans share. And that's, whether that's through connection or feeling heard or being seen. You have, I guess, termed this concept of the four energies. And I would love for you to be able to share that with our listeners as far as how that, how we all relate to those energies.
Again, thank you to my social abuse when I was younger. I have this compulsion to clarity. And again, being a therapist and having friends and living my own life and just, being alive for some decades, at a certain point, it occurred to me there are four energies that kind of move us forward in life and tell us what we're supposed to do. Because sometimes we're doing something that used to be great and is no longer. We don't have the energy for it anymore. It's draining our energy. It's hurting us in some ways. So I just came up with this really simple formula, if you will, or, four elements of how we decide what's up for us now and what's up for us next. And when something has faded for us and it's time to move on. And the four elements, those four, I call them four energies. One is, I'll just list them: bliss, blessed, pissed, and dissed. Bliss, blessed, pissed, and dissed. So blissed, obviously, is the stuff you love. Like, for some reason, songwriting spoke to you. Music spoke to you in some way. Other people, I can take it or leave it. For some reason, it spoke to me as well. I heard the Beatles when I was younger. I liked music, but I heard the Beatles and it energized me. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to see if I could do that. Play music or write music. And so that's your bliss. What do you love without anybody paying you for it, anybody pushing you into it? What just brings you alive in a certain way that you love? That's the easy one if you can find something like that in your life. And some people don't. They just don't have that in their life. They don't have any, it's like, yeah, I like that, but I'm not really that excited about anything. So that's bliss. Second one is blessed. And that is somebody sees something in you and recognizes it and encourages in you. You may have a friend who goes, wow, you're writing songs, play me one. And oh no, and then you play it and they go, that's great. And they encourage you. Could be a teacher that sees something in you. It could be a friend. It could be a family member, a grandparent, aunt and uncle, a parent who says you can do anything you want. They bless something in you. They see something in you and they encourage that. Sometimes you're just blessed with a natural talent. We've met people in the music business and I'm thinking, I could work my whole life and I will never be that good. They're just blessed with a natural talent. So occasionally it's just God given and nature given. But I think a lot of times it's human given. Someone has, seen something in us and encouraged something in us. When I first was starting to speak, my younger sister, as she was involved in a campus. We went to the same university. She was involved in some campus thing, asked me to be one of the panelists on a panel she was having. And when we ended, she just said, my gosh, you were great. You should be on Oprah. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's no way I'll ever be on Oprah. And she just believed in me. And every once in a while she'd say, have you contacted Oprah? And I'm like, I'm not going to contact Oprah. I have nothing to be on Oprah about. But eventually when I was on, she was the first person I called. You know what? Like 20 years ago, you told me I should be on Oprah and you were right. I'm going to be on Oprah. So, I mean, I've had family members and friends that have served that function, mentors, people like that. So anybody who's a mentor, anybody who believes in you and encourages you, that's the blessed thing. The next one, now we go to the more not so positive side, the negative side, if you will. Pissed is what pisses you off? What do you want to change? I remember hearing a story about Patrick Stewart, the guy who played in one of the Star Trek things, the actor. And his mother got the hell beat out of her when he was young. And when he became famous, one of his big passions was funding a series of battered women's shelters all over the UK, which is where he's from. And it just pissed him off that happened. And, he wanted to change it. Nelson Mandela wanted to change apartheid. Martin Luther King wanted to change civil rights stuff. What do you want? There's people in our songwriting industry who go to Washington with no pay and they go and advocate for songwriters because they made it really well. And now all of a sudden the younger songwriters aren't getting paid well. They're just righteously indignant. So the issue with pissed is you can't go into the workplace or the school with an AK-47, and you've got to channel the pissed into something that actually makes the world a better place. So using that energy to make something better, that's the key to transforming that negative energy into something that contributes. And then the last one is dist. Again, this is, where were you sensitized to some injustice or hurt? For me, I was, sexually abused when I was younger, as I said. And I have been sensitized to that issue. And when I was first a therapist, when people come in with those stories, I would take them seriously because I'd been through it myself. And it was seen as very, very rare thing when I started as a therapist in the 70s. It was seen as, this almost never happens. And it happens in certain really, really dysfunctional families. Well, I started to hear about half of my clients had been sexually abused in some way. And, so I thought, this is way more common than I'm hearing about. Now, years later, we're recognizing it is very common kind of thing. But where were you sensitized to something in the world that then you can take that sensitivity and somehow, again, develop it as a talent, as I did for writing books. I have this compulsion to clarity out of my wound, years ago, Joseph Campbell, who was a mythologist expert, was asked, what would you say to someone, a student who came to you and said, how do I live my life? He goes, follow your bliss. And then 20 years later, follow my bliss, follow your bliss was sort of a new age saying. And he said, I'm sorry. I think it got misunderstood. Maybe I should have said, follow your blisters, because it's often sometimes, where have you been hurt? Where have you been disrespected? So that's why I call it pissed and disrespected, dissatisfied. Where are you dissatisfied with the world? And how can you use that sensitivity to make the world a better place? So all through my life, I've noticed one of those energies has been at the forefront, or several of them have combined. I was pissed about the way psychotherapy is going. I was so focused on diagnosis and what was wrong with people and what happened in the past. I got so angry, I overcame my shyness and my fear of public speaking to become a public speaker, and then later to write books, because I was so pissed off about that stuff. So, but then I became blissful about it. I loved being a public speaker once I got over my fears. And, I've wandered through those four energies at various times in my life. And I know when a phase in my life is done, because the energy starts to drain in that area. And then I have to find what else energizes me. And we talked about me making a transition from psychotherapy to being a songwriter. I just knew I was sort of done with psychotherapy. I love it. I loved it. I loved being a therapist. I loved helping people relieve their suffering, but I'm done. There's something else calling me. And music was from an early age that. And I said, yeah, I think that's what's calling me at this point. And I followed it. And as you've said, I can't do it in a very small way. I jump in with both feet, and 2,000 plus songs in 8 years, and I can't stop it. I love it. I actually do love it. It is bliss for me. And
that's
so,
awesome.
yeah.
I love that for you. Well, it looks like you took your own advice and you were all in about doing one thing different. So if I could have you give our listeners a last nugget of advice, because I feel like we've been blessed with so many good tidbits from you today. If there's one last thing you would like to tell our listeners, what would you offer them?
Well, again, early on in my career, I saw people came in, I'd say the people that came in to see me for therapy had been traumatized in some way. And then trauma became a really big subject later. And I thought, again, most of the things we talk about trauma are all negative. It's like, oh, trauma will mess you up and it'll mess you up for life. Yeah, obviously trauma affects you for life. It certainly affected me to have that sexual abuse when I was younger, but it also contributed to my life. So I thought about this for a long time, and I thought, most of us have some sort of trauma, whether it's, it's a small T trauma or really big trauma, rape, super violence, a terrible car accident, the death of someone that you love prematurely, some terrible thing that happened to you. And I think, what's the difference between trauma that moves you on and grows you in some way? They call it post-traumatic growth in the psychology industry's, research. And I call it post-traumatic success. So what's the difference between when something bad, terrible happens and you develop post-traumatic stress, as opposed to when you develop post-traumatic success? And obviously some things are a mixture of the two. But to me, there are three elements, and we've already talked about one of them, but can you connect more deeply with yourself, others, and something beyond, some bigger purpose, meaning, spirituality, God, whatever you want to call it, in the wake of trauma? And if you can, it's most likely to move to post-traumatic success rather than post-traumatic stress. If you disconnect from yourself, that's called dissociation in psychology terms, from other people, that's withdrawing from the world and other people and pushing other people away or pulling away from other people. When you lose your sense of meaning or bigger purposes, the world is just a terrible place and there's no meaning here, that is much more likely to result in post-traumatic stress. Second, so the three C's, again, my little organized mind that helped me recover from my trauma. So the first C is connection. The second C is compassion. Can you be compassionate towards other people and towards yourself, forgiving, you can soften towards yourself, not be so self-critical or self down on yourself or other people. Doesn't mean not holding them accountable. I just mean for who they are. So if you can be more compassionate towards yourself and others in the wake of trauma, you're more likely to develop post-traumatic success. If you're more judgmental or harsh or punitive towards yourself and others, then you're more likely to develop post-traumatic stress. And I guess the third one is the C, its contribution. We've already talked about this. Can you take whatever happened to you and turn it into a contribution to make the world a better place? So if you've gone through a trauma, can you use that to energize you to maybe, get rape test kits tested because there's a backlog, and that becomes one of your missions, because you were raped and you were treated poorly by the system, or the person got away with it or something like that. Can you take whatever that trauma is and turn it into a contribution in the world? If you can't, and if you withdraw from the world and say, I've got to protect mine and I'm not going to help anybody else, you're more likely to develop post-traumatic stress. If you can turn it into contribution, it may be somewhat healing for you, which is, what my whole career was. I'd been traumatized, I was depressed, and I tried to take those experiences and try and go out and help other people and heal other people. What you're doing with this podcast, you went through a difficult time and you struggle with pleasing people, and now you're taking this and you're moving it out into the world in hopes that if one person hears something, it could be beneficial, like you, if you could have heard this when you needed it a long time ago. That is a healing thing to do, in my view.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for doing this.
I'm just elated that I got a chance to have some of your time today, and thank you so much. So one last thing before I let you go, where can our listeners find you if they want to connect with you? I know that you hold your time very, very close to your heart.
I generally hide because I was so public for so long, and I am such a people pleaser. I have been such a people pleaser. I think I'm changing that, but I try not to be so.
Follow you.
They can follow me. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and X and TikTok until it disappears. If it does, it looks like it's in danger. And then I have there's a whole I'm obviously where my energy is my songs, and I have a Spotify playlist. Bill O'Hanlon original songs released by others is the Spotify playlist. You can go see. And then my books mostly are in print, not all of them. Some have gone out of print. I'm working on my 43rd book at the moment, but most, I'd say probably 30 something are still in print. So they can find those on Amazon or wherever, sometimes in lending libraries, online lending libraries. And then I have some online courses as well. So they could go to billohanlon.org and sign up for an email list. They can get updates for any online classes. I don't teach them anymore, but I recorded them and someone else runs those courses. They're on how to write a book and get it published, how to be a public speaker, how to overcome trauma, and a few other topics, how to tell a good story, which is one of my favorite topics in songwriting and in life. So,
absolutely. So this 43rd book, is it going to be about songwriting or is it something else?
This one is about something else, but I'm back to the songwriting for the next book, which is with a guy I've written one of my earlier songwriting books about lyrics. It's called Leveling Up Your Lyric Writing with Marty Dodson. And he's come up with some new ideas. And I was like, Marty, please don't come up with new ideas. We'll have to write another book. So he did, and we're writing it. It's about half done. So after I get done with this other one, I'm going for the Marty. We're going to finish the Marty one. So.
Love it. Well, thank you, Bill, so much for joining us today. All right. You take care.
Thanks.